Welcome to the Secret Garden podcast. I'm your host, Heather Hamilton. This show is about seeing the whole world as a magical place for secret rendezvous, where we dance, where we express our provocative ideas with courage, where we play and are enchanted with beauty, where the miracles grow and the world reawakens. This garden is watered by you, the listener. Please consider helping it grow by becoming a donor on patreon.com/Heather Hamilton. Now it's time to dance in the garden. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Secret Garden podcast. This is episode 2. Thank you for tuning in again. Today, I just wanted to dive right in with something that I had been thinking about today, a word of encouragement and a theme that I'm probably going to be referring to a lot in this podcast. And that's the concept of the true and the false self, or one's essence versus one's ego. And what I'm referring to in that concept is this idea that's found in many faith traditions across, all forms of spirituality. You'll eventually come to this concept, and that is, what Christianity might call in the flesh is really an egoic concept that all of us have of who we are. It's our thoughts about ourselves, how we identify, all of our attachments that come together to form an identity. And we need a healthy ego to function in the world. But there's a certain threshold that one comes to on a spiritual journey, on the human journey, where that ego must be shed, must die, symbolically must be crucified. And that is the letting go and the death of all the attachments, all the identities, shedding of all of those layers, so that we can come to know and come into communion with our essence, what Thomas Merton would call the true self inside of us. And herein lies the kingdom of heaven, where we find our salvation, our spirit, where the fruits of the Spirit are born deep within us. In a lot of Orthodox art, which I have this piece right here. This is by, let's see, can we see it? This was done by Nancy Ewing, who is my icon painting teacher. I've just begun painting icon, but you can see here and in many icon paintings in Orthodox art, like get into focus for the YouTube viewers, that often the icon here, Jesus, is pointing to his heart, signaling to his heart. You'll see this over and over again in icon artwork. But the pointing to the heart is, symbolic of the inner spirit. In my book, Returning to Eden, I use the metaphor of a seed, which if you're watching on YouTube, I've got a couple seeds here. And the reason why I really like this metaphor is because we know this, but seeds grow on trees. And the first thing that grows is the embryo of a seed, the little green part, which is the embryo. And then in order for that embryo to fulfill its destiny and eventually become a tree, there has to be a shell that forms around it, a protective shell. And so the green embryo symbolizes our spirit, our soul, our essence, our true self, and the outer shell symbolizes our ego, our flesh, what Christianity might call our sin nature, but the Greek word for sin is actually hamartia, which means to miss the mark. And all that means is that we come to identify who we really are with the shell. We forget that there is an embryo inside. We fall asleep to that inner spirit. And that is really what the spiritual journey is about, is reawakening, remembering, which is, putting the parts back together, remembering um, who we are. And so, in order for that process to take place, the ego, the outer shell, has to form. If it didn't, there's no way that the inner essence could survive the journey of nature and fulfill its destiny. And so this is where guilt and shame falls away. That when we wake up and realize, usually at some second half of life, this usually doesn't happen for young children. If you were raised in the Christian religion, you were probably told, that you obtained your salvation with a sinner's prayer when you were a child. But as children, we still don't really know who we are. We haven't formed a solid ego. We haven't formed a solid identity. There's nothing yet formed that can then become old or be shed. So, step one is really from birth to adulthood, forming a really solid sense of an egoic self, a false identity that helps us navigate the world and get through the first half of life. But at some point usually in our adulthood, we come to a place where, functioning as the outer shell can no longer get us to where we need to go on our next stage of growth. And so that's really where the process of dying to self, becoming a new creation, death and resurrection, being swallowed by a whale and transformed and spit out, going to hell and resurrecting back into heaven. All these metaphors are pointing to this process of, the outer shell, the false self, the ego breaking down, the seed inside, the essence, the true self being buried in the ground. We see this very clearly in the picture of Jesus going into the heart of the earth is what the Bible says. As Jesus went into the heart of the earth, he's buried in the ground, as are we. And in that burial, roots begin to grow, gestation starts to take place, and suddenly the embryo takes root and grows into something completely new. So going back to our secret garden metaphor, it's, think of all the different plants in a garden and how they start out as some little seed. Paul talks about you'd never guess what a plant will look like just based on its seed. And so that is the process of transformation. That is what the spiritual journey is about, is allowing that false self, that ego, to be shed, and for the essential nature, the spirit, the true self, to be buried and gestate and birth into something new. This process can be terrifying. There are new practices that you have to adopt in order to not explode and not interrupt the process, right? When Jesus says that new wine can't be poured into old wineskins, or the new wine would just explode the old wineskins. He's talking about our nervous systems, right? Like we've navigated the whole first half of our lives, and our nervous systems have adapted to those environments. And when spirit is born inside of us, when our true self comes alive inside of us, that's a whole new energy that our bodies and our nervous systems then have to try to accommodate. So I can recall several times in our house where, we've had plumbing issues and the water to the house has to be turned off. And, there's a very particular way to go about doing that, depressurizing the house. But then you have to be careful because when you turn it back on, the water can come rushing back in so violently that it can spring leaks in the pipes. And so that's a really good picture of what can happen with our nervous system is, when the new spiritual energy is born, sometimes it can come in so violently, for lack of a better word, with so much pressure that if our nervous systems are not ready, then it can cause a lot of damage. And so I wanted to read you a couple things to give you some some ideas and some pictures about what this might look like. First, I'm going to start out with a poem. This is from my upcoming book, Eat the Dirt: 52 Poems on God and Being Human. It will release in the fall of 2025. But there's a poem in here called Embers in Eden. And this poem is really about the tumultuous journey of leaving the Garden of Eden, falling asleep, and re-entering Eden. And, in Genesis, it tells us that at the gate of Eden is an angel with a flaming sword. And so the entrance back into Eden is hot. It's not something super romantic. It's a lot of burning away of old deadwood to cross the threshold, to cross through the gate back into Eden. And so this poem is called Embers in Eden. I'm going to read this to you and then set up this next idea. Embers in Eden. Perhaps the hell I've always feared was burning inside of me, and the only way to heaven was falling forward through the fire. Sparked by grace, my soul ignites, mind and heart engulfed in heat. I've made a mistake. Let me drift back to sleep. Give me the inferno I thought was heaven, the combustion I called love. Take me back to entertaining the fantasies I dreamed of. This pain is suffocating, my life bursting into flames, writhing in the violent death of everything I knew burning down. But as smoke begins to clear, gray ash settles on the ground. I dust off a brilliant diamond. At last I am found. The secret garden of my longing, just past the flaming sword. A blaze of truth cut through the deadwood until finally I was free. Now embers are extinguished. Eden's earth has finally cooled. The tree of life stretched up to heaven, casting shadow streets of gold. And so that is a poem about the return to the true self, the return to essence, the return to the secret garden of Eden, if you will, that lives inside of us, where we find paradise. So in my book, Returning to Eden, here it is, for YouTube, I have a chapter in here, chapter 20, called Go Into Your Closet and Close the Doors. And in Matthew 6:6, it says, "But thou, when thou prayest, enter into thy closet, and when thou hast shut the door, pray to your Father, which is in secret." And so, growing up, I thought that this just meant to pray privately, which I think that is a part of it, but I want to give you another perspective on this. This quote is from St. Gregory Palamas. He is a church father living in the 1200s or 1300s. He says, "The closet of the soul is the body. Our doors are the 5 bodily senses. The soul enters its closet when the mind does not roam among the things of this world and the affairs of this world, but stays within, in our heart. Our senses become closed and remain closed when we do not let them be attached to external sensory things. In this way, our mind remains free from every worldly attachment, and by mental secret prayer unites with God, its Father." And so I love that because as we're talking about awakening to the true self, awakening to our essence, and calibrating our nervous system to be able to accommodate that spirit and find that secret place inside of us. St. Gregory here is talking about, the doors being our 5 external senses, what we can see, what we can hear, what we can smell, taste, and touch. And so, it's about closing off those senses, closing off all the external stimuli that distracts us from listening to the secret silent place inside of us. The Bible says, be still and know that I am God. And part of being still is what we find here, going into our quote unquote closet, going into ourselves and shutting the doors, shutting off all the external sensory inputs. A very common way to do this is through practicing meditation or contemplative prayer. And it's about, bringing the mind back into stillness, back into alignment with the heart. And, in the heart, we find stillness, peace, love, joy, alignment with God, alignment with, what he calls the Father, the place where our true self resides, and God are the same place inside of us. And so as we shut out all the external stimuli, all the distractions, and, even beyond the physical external stimuli, it's all of our identities, right? And we come to just this place of pure presence, pure stillness, pure awareness, and into communion with who we are. And we get familiar with what that feels like. And as we get familiar with what that feels like, our nervous systems and our bodies start to calibrate to that feeling. And so the practice becomes, sitting with ourselves, sitting with our essence, becoming familiar and calibrated long enough that more and more becomes how we move throughout the world. And then our external world starts responding to the essence of who we are in our internal world. And so I hope that helps you to think of that verse about going into your closet and closing the doors in a little bit of a different way. It means that you can do that anywhere. Your closet is your heart inside of you, the secret garden, the place where your essence and God reside. And you have access to that at any time. And it is a practice to find and feel that place and experience the fruits of the Spirit that are born from there. But it's a practice that's very worthwhile. And so I just want to leave you with that today. Thanks again for listening, and I will see you next time. Thanks for dancing with me in this episode of The Secret Garden. Please consider watering the garden by becoming a donor on patreon.com/Heather Hamilton. You can also visit returningtoeden.com, where you'll find my writing on Substack, my books, information about spiritual direction sessions, and speaking. Until next time, remember that the whole world is a secret garden.